It's been almost 2 months since Canada went to the polls with election 43 and the Liberal government being returned to power with a minority government. And of course, you ran for the People's Party of Canada with Maxime Bernier as leader in London North Centre, but we'll get to that later. What do you think the last election shows or reveals about the mood of Canada? Why they would go for somebody like Justin Trudeau again, with Jagmeet Singh in not official opposition, but holding the balance of power in Parliament. What does that say about the mood of Canada and where we may be headed?
Yeah, I mean, what it says is right off the bat, Canada is now divided between East and West in a way that it wasn't, at least over the past 4 decades at least. You know, the last time that there was this sort of a situation of the East-West divide was in the 1970s, you know, with under Pierre Trudeau, Justin Trudeau's father, and when he brought down the National Energy Program to in some ways penalize Alberta and the oil industry. So we are in a different climate, in a different century, in a different context, and it seems to me the division is far more serious now than it was in the 1970s. So that's one immediate impact of it. The other one is, we can see very clearly, is that what most, at least Central Canadians and Western Canadians, that is, rest of Canada outside of Quebec, wanted to believe that the separatist movement had basically, you know, dwindled, diminished, and was withering away, came back very strong in this election. Quebec, the Bloc Québécois won big in Quebec, and that is a phenomenon again one has to think about. You know. What that means going forward. So you have Western Canada, particularly Saskatchewan and Alberta, deeply alienated. There's a rise of some sort of a separatist movement again, which most of us believe that had been in some way resolved in the 1990s with the reform movement and the whole movement that eventually led to the rebuilding of the Conservative Party that had crashed in the 1993 election under Mulroney and Kim Campbell, with only 2 seats. And then you had 10 years of a Conservative government under Stephen Harper from 2006 to 2015. But we are back again into Western alienation, far deeper, far more serious, despite all of this. And we have separatist Bloc Québécois back again, very much alive, very much moving. I mean, what they want is we're going to see as we move forward. So the story of this election then comes down, Canada divided, and the battle for who will form the government, who will run the country in terms of the establishment parties. I would call them all establishment parties, and we can talk about that in a moment. Which of the establishment party will take hold of the steering wheel in Ottawa is that Ontario is where elections are fought and elections are lost.
121 seats?
121 seats.
Yeah.
And Ontario once again decided who would manage the affairs in Canada. And that's a question, I believe, that we in the PPC, but rest of Canada has to very seriously look into this matter. You say 121 seats. In 2015 election that 2011 election that gave Harper the majority government, Ontario was the battleground. It was Harper winning significant number of seats that the Conservatives had not won, going all the way back to the 1984 and 88 election with Mulroney. That is what came to be defined as the 905 belt outside of Toronto, the GTA, the Greater Toronto Area. And Harper won quite a few seats over there. Also won quite a few seats in the city of Toronto, that is the main heart of Toronto. And that gave Harper and the Conservative the number of seats required to form a majority government without winning in Quebec.
Do you think that the Liberal government, especially under Justin Trudeau, has an animus towards Alberta, Saskatchewan, Manitoba, not just electorally, you know, as indicated by the last election, not returning a single Liberal seat in those provinces, but since the election, you've had a rail strike, you had no movement on pipelines, no indication that Trudeau is going to do anything for those three provinces. Is there I'm reticent to use the word hatred for these provinces and the people in them by Justin Trudeau and the Liberals? Or is it just, well, they don't have the votes, so why bother?
Yeah, I mean, those are all very serious questions going back to what I would say is the heart of the problem of Canadian Federation, and to look at Canadian Federation, how it is structured, and where do we have come, at least over the past 50 years. I mean, 2017, we marked the 150th anniversary of Canada, 1867, 2017. So if you break up Canada into 50-year periods, so this last 50 years is, in that sense, the decisive context within which this post-centenary Canada has evolved since 1967, when Canada celebrated the 100th anniversary. So, yeah, I mean, these are very, I think, serious problems, and in my view, neither the media nor any of the establishment parties are addressing and will not address. As I said, Ontario is where governments are formed, elections are won and elections are lost. Just to pick up my thoughts from what I was pointing out, 121 seats. In 2011, Harper was able to win enough seats in Ontario to form a government without winning seats in Quebec. Quebec has 78 seats, Ontario has 121 seats, and now the Liberal Party under Justin Trudeau was a third party, if you remember, in 2015 election, somewhere under 40 seats. From being a third party, it jumped to forming a majority government. How did that happen? Well, it was again Ontario, 121 seats, and it gave the Liberals under Justin Trudeau 80 seats.
What does that say about the nature of Canada as a federation? We're not a unitary state like the United Kingdom, where Westminster basically controls everything, and powers are devolved and can be taken away by Westminster. Here we have a federation. The Constitution can't be changed without provincial agreement in a lot of respects, and provinces have supposed control over a number of different things, education, healthcare, resources, and yet we see Justin Trudeau and the Liberals acting as if this was a unitary state, and then what he says goes for everybody, and it doesn't matter about provincial jurisdiction or provincial sympathies.
Very much so. You're right. I mean, Canada is not a unitary state. Britain is a unitary state. The Canadian system, that's our parliamentary system of government, is modeled after the mother country, Britain. I think that's the very interesting backstory that we need to explore, which is not talked about enough, you know. That the founders, Sir Johnny Macdonald and the other premiers of the maritime provinces, when they got together to work out the making of what became Canada, and getting the act together, the BNA Act and so on, which was our makeup, our parliament, our legislature. The model that they chose given who they were and their background, their experience, their history, was the British model. Now, the backstory that I'm pointing out is that the 13 colonies, Canada was part of it. Canada was the northern part of what was St. Lawrence, up St. Lawrence of the British North America. And then there were the 13 colonies in south of the St. Lawrence Seaway or river. Those 13 colonies came together to lead the revolution and subsequently establish the United States. Now the people, the founding fathers of the United States, as would be the founding fathers of Canada, came from principally the same stock, culturally. Mm-hmm. They were Irish, they were Scottish, they were English. They looked to the mother country. The rebellion, the Boston Tea Party, the rebellion and the revolution and the war that they fought was against the mother country. And a whole lot of people who did not accept that, the loyalists, they came north, up from the 13 colonies. So in the case of the 13 colonies, the model that they devised was going to be a democracy, but they became a republic. That means they broke away from the crown. And so their constitutional model was a unique model at that time. Unique, and yet there are parallels with the French, because the French Revolution happened after 1776. And so the ideas that were at play at that time was, in contrast to a monarchy, a constitutional monarchy in the case of Britain, or an absolute monarchy in the case of France, the opposite would be the republican form of government. The head of state elected by the people is the people.
Well, it's a federal system of government.
Well, France was not a federal,
system,
is a unitary state.
No, I'm talking about the United States.
But the United States would be a federal, and so that's where they
you have states powers, you have a Senate,
exactly,
which with
the
powers,
Constitution, yeah,
and elected now after the 17th
Right.
Amendment, and you have a lower house.
Yeah.
And here we're supposed to have representation in the Senate to represent the regions, but it's totally ineffective. It has zero power. It's never been used, well, at least not in modern times.
Yeah.
And so our model, even though it's supposedly a federated model to allow for people in Alberta to feel welcome or to be a part of this federation, it isn't. We're acting like a unitary state with a monarch named Justin Trudeau in this particular case.
Yeah, here then therefore is the debate, academic debate, historical debate.
The debate, I guess, is can we survive?
Debate. Pardon?
I think the debate is can we survive as a nation? It's rather young, 150 years. But
yeah, my view is yes, we will survive as a nation, but we have to know the mechanism. You have to know how the parts function, and so the backstory is extremely important. I mean, you raised the issue of Senate. That's in a federation, the two chambers, upper house and lower house. You know, the lower house representing the people in the Congress, in the Constitution, and the Republic that the American founding fathers constructed and devised. The people are represented in the House of Representatives. You know, 425 seat house represents the people of America based upon population. The seats are, and the Senate represents the federation, the states. You know, equal Senate right from the start. It was an equal Senate. It was not based upon population. It was based upon
2 members per state.
Yeah, it was based upon the representation of the state, and so the equality of state. It didn't matter if you were little Connecticut, or you would be a massive California that came about later on. But in that time, you know, little Connecticut, as opposed to, say, New York, which was a big state, or Pennsylvania, which was a big state, it didn't matter the size of the population. The representation was 2 senators in the upper house. Now, the secret or the key to understanding this architecture, I might say the constitutional architecture, is the separation of powers. Mm-hmm. The republic, and especially, and that's what the American system is so unique, and it has worked out so well, despite catastrophes. And I'll come to that in a moment. But the secret is separation of powers. What they learned, what the founding fathers learned, and they were extremely well-read people. They had thought this matter through. They were, remember, 1776, this is the 18th century. This is the Scottish Renaissance. Adam Smith, David Hume, all the great writers that we look back upon now, Locke. These were the people who were writing, talking, and the American founding fathers were well read into them. But the one, I think, that became the critical or the most important thinker in terms of constitutional architecture for the founding fathers in America was Montesquieu, separation of power. Power, you have to, not allow it to be centralized in one place, or in one institution. So you have then, 3 equal branches of government were created: the legislative branch, the executive branch, and the judiciary. And that would be the check and balance. They're all equal. They all have the jurisdiction. The Congress is elected by the people in districts, or the senator elected or appointed, at that time it was appointed by the state assembly, so they represent that district or that state, whereas the president is elected by all the people. So that's the only person, the only institution, the only chair that represents all Americans. So today is America from Maine and Rhode Island all the way to California.
And it has the Electoral College.
And then there is the unique development of electoral college.
Which is why, just as somebody like a Donald Trump can get elected.
Yeah, absolutely. And so that electoral college get elected. Why? Because it is the electoral college makes it relevant that the votes of the smaller states are not in any way trumped. Pardon the use of the word Trump. It's not trumped by the heavily populated state. If there was no electoral college, nobody would care for what happens in Wyoming or Minnesota or Nebraska. Basically, New York, state of New York, state of California, and Texas would elect whoever is the next president.
So do you think perhaps that Jason Kenney, the Premier of Alberta, and his counterparts out in the West, and maybe even in the Atlantic provinces, rather than be talking about separation, Jason Kenney's not talking about it, but at least the people are, they should be bringing up the Triple E Senate again, something to change, and a Premier's Conference once again to talk about this, I would say, dysfunctional system that we have, where the Laurentian elites once again can dictate over the provinces and the outlying provinces outside of Ottawa.
Absolutely, but this was a problem, again, dividing up Canadian history becomes sharp and acute, and where we have arrived at in the last 50 years. So, if I might just go back to fill out this, your question is extremely relevant, because that's the discussion we need to have, the conversation we need to have as a country right now. But again, the backstory is so important. For the founding fathers, remember, 1867 is coming on the heels of the Civil War in America. It was the bloodiest war in modern time. The next one would be the World War I and World War II. But until World War I and World War II, the American Civil War was the bloodiest of World War. It was, the guns had come in, mechanical instruments had come in, and it was a killing field. Over, I believe, close to 1 million people died, Union and Confederate. So and the flames of that war was touching the Canadian frontier. And the fear was, after the war, now war was over, would the Americans expand north? So the rush to form the federation, the rush to adopt the thing, but they saw what was happening in America, and they drew certain lessons, and they drew the lesson that the parliamentary system is a better system, even though we're going to be a federation, the parliamentary system, because that's where, you see, the power of the states, and that's where the Confederacy came in. The Confederacy raised the flag, fired the guns at the Union forces in Sumter, Georgia, that sparked the Civil War. The states, the slave-owning states wanted to maintain the slave-owning states, and the northern states wanted to end slavery. But slavery was not the issue that actually sparked the war. It was the powers of the state, and whether the states can separate or not. So those were all lessons at play, which we have forgotten, right? But now we are facing those issues.
Times change, and now the United States Revolution, of course, 13 colonies would ratify their constitution after the success of the War of Independence. But in Canada, you had 4 colonies, Upper and Lower Canada, Nova Scotia, New Brunswick, come together to form a parliamentary federation. And that has since...
You had 4 maritime provinces, no, 3 maritime provinces.
PEI didn't
PEI was where the discussion took place, Charlottetown.
But that was the first, discussions took place, but they didn't join until later.
Among the maritime, today, Newfoundland was not there. Newfoundland, Labrador was still, so it was Nova Scotia, PEI, New Brunswick,
Upper and Lower Canada.
And then you had the Upper and Lower Canada.
Right, so I mean, that's where our centralized government and form of government came from, was the Laurentians.
The centralization, no, it was, I mean, again, we should be a little cautious about the term. The centralization is a new phenomena, or I would argue is a post-Second World War phenomena, 1945 phenomena. Post-1945. What was it that, see, the American Constitution, American architecture is separation of power, and therefore the place of the states, and the state represented in the central government, or in the capital, in the Congress, through the Senate, where all the states are equal. And each of the states can protect their interests through the senators. Connecticut may elect 5 congressmen, whereas New York elects, say, 30 congressmen. But in the Senate, there's 2 New York senators and 2 Connecticut senators.
But my point is, though, Salim, is that when that was created, the American Constitution, there was 13 powers.
13
colonies. States, right, colonies.
Yeah, which became states,
No, but within Canada, you only had 4.
It doesn't matter.
No, but what I'm trying to say is that
we had
at
5.
that time...
we had 5. It doesn't matter how many you have, but
1867. 1867, there was 4, right? PEI didn't join.
PEI would join later.
But I'm saying that under 1867, you had just 4 very close British-type colonies create a British-type parliamentary system, but since then we now have 10 provinces and territories.
Correct. So
what I'm saying is that, Salim, that 13 competing states and colonies versus 4 very close colonies.
Right.
Now you have 2 different forms of government. One, the American one, allowed for a huge expansion with 50 states now.
Right.
We went from 4 to 10.
Right.
But in going from 4 to 10, we kept a British model, which doesn't seem to be working because we don't have, as you say, the separation of powers.
No, but this is where I'm coming to. I mean, we are looking at our founding fathers. I mean, they made the decisions. We can change it. Our amending formula is there, but we won't have that agreement. So America now has, since the founding fathers, America now has something like 27 amendments, right? So there is the amending. People change, and so on and so forth, and adapt. But the main structure is what we are talking about. So as I pointed out, and I believe the key to understanding the American structure is separation of power. The lesson that our founding fathers took in their architecture of the Canadian Federation was not only to adopt the British model, the parliamentary system of government, it was also in the parliamentary system of government, no separation of power. So you have the legislature and the executive together, But where the federation is maintained in this system is through the elected representatives. So Quebec, Ontario, these are the 2 larger provinces in the founding of the state, and then the other provinces, and subsequently as we expand, and we can expand even more, That's, Nunavut might become a province. It is now a territory, or, Northwest Territory might become a province. We might break it up, divide it, so on and so forth. All of that is fair play. But the point is that the Founding Fathers took the view that there will be no separation of powers, and it will be represented. And so how the interests of the provinces, that is the federation, will be maintained is through the parliamentary representation, And so that had to be worked out in what is the British system of government, or the mother of parliament, based upon, without getting into too great a detail, the British system is based upon, there's no written constitution in the British system. It is based upon common law and precedents. And the Founding Fathers were all, in that sense, seeing the experience of the United States and the people who had left the United States or the 13 colonies and came as loyalists. I mean, maritime provinces are full of loyalists. So the Acadians and so on and so forth. So for them, why had they left? Why were they loyalists? They still maintain that the best form of government is a constitutional monarchy. So that's the difference. We remain a 1867 to now, we're still a constitutional monarchy. Now, it's not simply a matter of federal-provincial relationship. We might, if you want to change it, if you want to make a substantive change, then the change will lead to the question of, if you're no longer going to be a constitutional monarchy, what will we be? Who will be our head of state? Where will be our sovereignty? So on and so forth. India, for instance, that adopted the British model of government. India is a parliamentary system of government, has two houses, the upper house and the lower house. And similar to Canada, it is not an equal upper house, unlike the United States. Australia has it. But we are all constitutional monarchy, Australia and Canada and New Zealand, but India went republic. And it broke away from that system. And so it has an elected president. But the elected president is not an elected president like the American president, elected by all the people in a national plebiscite. The Indian president of the republic, therefore the head of the state, is elected by the parliament. That is, the parties nominate their preferred candidate, and the vote takes place only in the parliament. Right. So there are all of these things that we have to, look at. So we are still a constitutional monarchy, and it was our representation, it was our common law practice, it was our tradition. So in that sense, the parliament is supreme and so on. What has changed? I mean, you raised the issue of unitary state, and the British system works. It is a unitary state. Our system has now run into a problem because we are federation. We have run into a problem is the patriation of the Constitution and what Pierre Trudeau did. Pierre Trudeau, we are now in a sort of a neither one nor the other. We are neither a horse nor a mule. We have now a constitution, a written constitution with a Charter of Rights and Freedom. We have followed that American model. The American has a constitution, it has a Charter of Rights and Freedom, and that's called the Bill of Rights, the first 10 amendments. The first 10 amendments is the American Bill of Rights, or American Charter of Rights. So we have. And so this has empowered. The shift has taken place where power has moved incrementally from the parliament to the PMO to the Prime Minister, short-circuiting the parliamentary caucus, short-circuiting the cabinet, which would be representing the provinces if they were elected, to the Prime Minister's office, and then from there to the courts, the judiciary. Increasingly, the judiciary has become the driver of Canadian politics in the sense, they make the decision, and the parliament, that is, have no say in the matter. Whatever they say gets challenged or will be challenged, goes into the court. And that is the centralizing effect that has taken place. And we have been running more or less over the last 50 years, in this graduated movement of incrementalism to becoming a unitary state de jure, that is, de facto, not in de jure, not constitutionally, but factually. And that's where the dysfunctionality is. Now, the challenge for us is to rebalance it and make the provinces equal. And that argument had begun with the Reform Party, you know.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's why I was going back.
And should the Triple E Senate.
Right. Should we be talking rather than secession for Albertans?
Yeah.
And at one time, Newfoundland was thinking of leaving the Federation as well.
Yeah.
But should we be talking about getting back to another Premier's Conference and bringing in a Triple E Senate, equal, effective, and elected?
Absolutely. So the question is, why haven't we done that, and what are the impediments or obstacles to doing it? Why did that energy that was built up in the argument when Reform Party came along in 1988 and then started moving forward, got elected one member, then enough member, eventually became in the 2000 election the opposition party, then emerged the right, then Conservative Party, Stephen Harper government. Where did all that energy go? I mean, one of the key issues of the Triple E Parliament was equality of the Senate, you know, a Triple E Senate, you know, effective, equal, and something else. It was
elected.
Elected, yeah. Now all of that was abandoned, and part of the reason I would say is that outside of the West, where it began, this argument, there is no consensus because the other provinces have to agree. And
yeah, well, they don't care because they were holding the balance.
Precisely.
Right?
Precisely. They don't care. Ontario and Quebec are the biggest stumbling block. And then there are the maritime provinces, you know. I mean, you have only 4 seats in PEI, I believe. How many?
4, I believe, yes, in PEI.
4 seats in PEI. But they have quite a few senators over there.
Well, it's true. As a matter of fact, some of the people, some of the votes cast in the PEI election just passed, right, the federal election, were like 10,000.
Yeah.
Versus like in your riding, 60,000.
Right.
There's certainly that trying to balance the fact that this is a separate province, but if we went by population alone, they would be totally out of the picture.
That's right. So that's where the balancing would come in, maintaining the equality of province in the upper house. You know, so the interests of Alberta or Saskatchewan and others would be then fought out and considered and given due weight and consideration if there was an equal Senate.
Now, let me posit to you that you asked what happened to all that energy with the Preston Manning, the Reform Party, the Canadian Alliance. I would suggest to you, and this may be a good point to end the discussion and continue in another video, would be that all of that energy went into creating the Conservative Party of Canada, which was supposed to represent that kind of a viewpoint of trying to rework the Federation so that it's a Canadian party. And then we had Andrew Scheer come into the picture with a rigged election to get him to be the leader of this party, totally turn around the entire policies of that party and cozy up to the Laurentian elites and try again to win by winning in Ontario and Quebec. The rest of the country be damned. Maybe we can continue that discussion in another video. What do you think?
Okay.